Well, here we are. The election's over. The silly season has gone into a holding pattern for now. So we're going to get together with a group from the liberal side. And when we had our conservative group and I asked for their impression, Uncle Ed started with "holy cow." And I couldn't think of a better way to open up the show. But let's start with introductions and then ask you the same question.
I'm Rand Barthel. I live in Mendon. I'm a member of Drinking Liberally, and I'm also here in Milford, and I'm also a climate activist.
I'm Carolyn Barthel, also in Mendon, a climate activist and a member of Drinking Liberally.
I'm Christine Crane. I'm from Milford and chair of the Drinking Liberally, and I'd like to consider myself an activist, union involved, and chair of the Democratic Town Committee.
Lisa Mozinski, I'm from Douglas, and I'm a member of the Democratic State Committee, along with Christine as well, and happy to partake in Drinking Liberally when I can. So happy to be here.
Christine, where do we start?
That's a good question. My first response when I woke up that morning was WTF. I thought
The Worldwide Trade Federation?
yeah, that's it.
Right.
Yeah, I was in disbelief, really. I really was surprised, right? Disappointed, I'll have to be honest, and surprised, and at this point resigned and disappointed now, not so much in the outcome as much as I am with people that didn't get out and vote, people that refused to participate, because I think the outcome would have been a lot different.
Now, at the end of the day, what do you think was the deciding? We can go through 100 little nibbles, but what do you think the overall was?
I think the overall temperature of the country is that they're frustrated and angry with the current administration overall, and not citing any party or any one person. I think years of no progress and inner fighting, and we got bombarded with how much influence a lot of politicians have with big business and deep pockets, and I think people had just said enough, and Trump spoke to that to them. He spoke to their anger, their emotion, and in a lot of ways Bernie Sanders did the same thing, the opposite end of the spectrum. So I think Hillary represented too much of the establishment.
Four
for a
more
lot of
years.
people. Yeah, and I don't think she did enough to distinguish herself from that and separate herself from what we have now, and what is she going to do different? She played the same old game card.
Now, let me ask you a question. To me, people just didn't like Hillary.
That too.
Not that they liked President Trump or President-elect Trump, but, when I think of the Bill Clinton era, whether you agreed with him or not, he was a likable person. And it seemed like they just didn't like her. And when you tie that to the fact that it seemed like she was very influential in the present regime, so 4 more years of somebody that we don't like just seemed not to fit well. Am I missing something?
Well, I would say that we need to include the misogyny factor in this. That's part of the we don't like her, although that's not the whole story.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
A lot of
Absolutely.
people couldn't accept a woman.
Yep.
There are, it's not like everybody's like that, or that there's enough people out there who really just are not comfortable with the idea of a woman exercising that kind of power. And it's enough to make a difference.
Okay, because I'm going to say, I'll come out and say it. I would not vote for Hillary just because she's a woman. But I wouldn't not vote for her because she's a woman.
So the gender had nothing to do with it
No,
for you.
to me,
No.
you pick the best candidate. And then whether it's a black, a white, a Chicano, whatever, a man, a woman, I don't really care. So, I don't know, maybe...
Also, over and over again during the campaign, you heard how she is the most qualified person to ever have run for president, which I'm not going to argue. She's a former Secretary of State. She's a former First Lady. She has more than enough qualifications and a comfort zone to be in the White House. But to your point, there was somewhere that she didn't connect, and then there was somewhere that people felt that she was too aligned with Wall Street and with sort of an
Existing
elitist part of the country, versus that we have thousands of millions of people who want a champion for their cause, because thank goodness President Barack Obama got us through that huge, horrible recession where the whole economy almost collapsed. But after that, poverty did not decrease, it increased. And unemployment, there's still so many people who are partially employed, or they see their kids not employed, in fact, overwhelmed with student debt. And there just wasn't enough being done, so that the time was ripe for President-elect Trump to come in with a message that said, I'm going to be your champion. And to Christine's point, so did Bernie Sanders. But everything, wasn't in his favor in this particular race.
Lisa, it's funny because in my heart, I believe if Bernie ran, he would have won. I also believe if somebody like the other Rand, or even a Jeb Bush ran against Hillary, it wouldn't have been as close. Because people seem to
I agree
like
with you.
them. And they seem to deal with the warts better. I mean, let's face it, Hillary has a lot of warts. But it's not like Trump was
Wartless.
wartless.
I know. Somehow
say
his
that he's a
warts
wart
look
on top of
better
a
than
pimple.
Hillary's because of all the stuff that was thrown at him, the lawsuits and his crass presentation and his insulting and
his inciting the press,
yeah.
inciting his base
Supporters.
to attack reporters and verbally and.
somehow
effect-
people like that, or I shouldn't say people, but there was a group,
Enough
there was a
of people
base that forgave him for
disliked
that.
Hillary more.
A lot of people made excuses for Trump, though. They said, "Well, he's not really going to do that. He's just he's just playing this up. He's just doing this." They interpreted what they wanted to
But
interpret.
isn't
with
that
his,
symptomatic of I'm trying to rationalize
It is.
why?
Yeah.
And I kept hearing, like Brexit, that a lot of people didn't want to publicly say they would support Trump. So you never really heard them say, no, I'm not going to vote for her, I'm going to vote for him, or whatever.
Well, and certainly the polls mostly got this wrong. I mean, coming into election night, it looked as though Hillary had a fairly stable, not comfortable, but fairly stable lead, and that she had a lot more ways to get to 270 than Trump did. And so, pretty clearly something different happened from what all the pollsters and their mathematical models said would happen.
But let me play devil's advocate. Did it really, or
Well, I mean,
did they just miss it?
well, Hillary did get, and it now appears that she got 1.7 million more votes than
She
Trump
won the
did.
popular vote. I don't
Yeah.
think anybody's going to question
He's the
that.
second Al Gore now.
Yeah.
Yes, I was going to say,
Without
hello,
the
Al
Supreme
Gore.
Court.
Also, I mean, he won by about 500,000 votes, the popular vote.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
So what the pollsters are blaming it on is the fact that, like what you said, if it's a one-on-one conversation for a poll, the answers may have been much truer. But when you were doing a lot of robocalls and polling electronically, press this button, it was much easier to fake it and not be true, give a true response. Because, hey, this is just another pollster. I mean, can you imagine living in New Hampshire and getting,
Inundated.
bombarded? How many times they had polls and door knocks and calls and calls? I mean,
Yeah, but again,
you're not going to answer truthfully
Lisa,
after a while because there's
Kelly
no
Ayotte
validity.
lost by a landslide, right? What was it, 3,000 votes? Or you got to be kidding me. I mean, I laughed when I said not 2 years ago when people said their vote doesn't matter in local elections. John Erickson was leading by 20 votes with 7 out of 8 precincts coming in. and the 8th precinct came in 40 votes roughly for Joe Calery, and Joe won by 13 votes. 13 people. Now, when I think of an entire state,
3,000 votes.
I can't remember the exact number, but it was
Minuscule.
statistically insignificant. You know, and you sit there and say, okay, something that close you couldn't call.
No.
But somewhere in all of these sophisticated polls, it seems like you missed a whole bunch of people.
I gotta wonder who they were polling though too. Now again, correct me if I'm wrong. I was hearing that certain polls could only be done by a landline, and so a lot of millennials don't have landlines.
Right.
You know, and so
That's right.
who are they polling? And maybe they need to rethink their process too.
Well, and do pollsters adjust their models of how many people respond and so forth based on the effect of there being lots of other pollsters out there who are bothering people?
So how do they reconcile all those different
Right.
polls and yeah?
Well, the
yeah.
other thing is we kept hearing that the old elephants are going to the elephant graveyard. The Republican Party is going away. They're missing
Bye-bye.
the. No, this is not your dream.
You should see what happens in our dream.
You sit there and say, is the Democratic Party not in more turmoil?
Well, I think. Oh, go ahead, Carolyn.
I think they're both in turmoil because the establishment on both sides, both the Republicans and the Democratic sides, are people are not interested in the establishment anymore. They want a new cut. They want a new generation. They want they want our political system to be more reflective of who their constituents are than is happening.
Is it safe to say they want results?
Well, that too. But the very fact that we're talking about the establishment and using a term from the 60s.
Sound like the 1960s?
That was used by
Bernie
60s
started it.
radicals.
That was a derogatory term,
It was a
too.
derogatory term, and it's intended as a derogatory term, and it still carries that meaning today.
The fight against the man. I
But
guess today
both
that'd be called
parties
sexist.
own a piece
It
of
would have to
the
be the fight
establishment.
against the person.
Person.
But it really was a cry against status quo.
You know what? Maybe this is good, because out of crisis, out of all this conflict and chaos, comes some change, and maybe the time is right. We need to rethink across the boards how our democracy plays out, how we do things, and so there's nothing wrong with rethinking and stepping back and
And it's
making
not
changes.
just our political party. I mean, I don't want to get into religion, but you think of the new pope. The people in Vatican saying, "Who let the Jesuit in the building?" I mean, all of a sudden there's a vast refocus in his mind of, wait a minute, what are we doing for the poor? Why are we only dealing, and he said, 2 issues. To me, that is going against the grain. When I think of the Democratic Party, and I think of that impenetrable blue wall, and you say, Swiss cheese? What happened?
Nothing's foolproof. Fools are ingenious, they say. So, you can't take for granted what you have. And I think you have to keep building and strengthening and reconnecting. And I think both parties lost their way in some ways.
To answer your question, I think both parties are in turmoil. Because
Very much so.
we don't really know how the Republican Party is going to define itself yet.
But if I could interrupt, the Republicans didn't seem to embrace the Donald Trumpism.
My point.
But now they own it. I mean,
Well-
in the end, 90% of them voted for it.
I'll ask the question later, but it's this not my president nonsense. I'm sorry, he is our president, or he will be. So as a Republican, you have to accept the fact that, okay, you now have a charter. People are expecting you got the House, you got the Senate, you've got the presidency. You best be doing something.
And you will be held responsible for everything that happens because nobody else is doing it. You're doing it. You own
You
it.
can't blame,
And,
the Democratic Senate won't let me do this, or the Democrats in the House. I'm sorry, you've got the gun and the bullets.
When was it? Earlier this summer when they voted, when there was the bill in Congress to have, what was it? To allow people to sue Saudi Arabia.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And so it passed both houses, and Obama vetoed it, and then they overrode his veto, and he said all along, this is not a good thing. You don't want to,
This
we'll
is
have
one
all
of the
these.
scariest things I've seen. Okay, you're letting the toothpaste out of the tube. How would you? I mean, let's face it. We stood the moral high ground of saying you can't sue us, we can't sue you.
Right. But
What happens now?
And what I find
Indeed.
appalling was that after somehow it sunk in, I don't know why it didn't sink in before, the Republicans were saying, oh, well, geez, Obama should have told us better, explained this to us better. Excuse me, it was their law to
They
begin
don't know how to
with.
read?
Because they started having
And-
buyer's remorse
and,
on this thing.
Yeah.
they just weren't taking
But I have a
responsibility.
fundamental issue with that because you have staffers. When you look
Exactly.
at Congress, there are not 100 people in the Senate that are doing the research. Each
No.
senator
They all have a staff
Right.
has a staff
whose
So-
job it is to make sure that their senator knows what's going on,
has an informed opinion.
knows what these bills
So
do.
blaming somebody else, I don't care. I mean, I never liked when Obama, for too many years, kept saying it was Bush's fault. It's like enough. It's 8 years ago. Get over it.
But a lot of presidents have done that.
And I don't. But,
And
you
for
know,
a while,
Christine,
they used that.
This whole thing with the Supreme Court, I was really disappointed that the Republicans borked the Democrats. But let's face it, the Democrats borked the Republicans. They did the same thing. I'm not saying it's right. I don't let either party off the hook.
Well, I don't know if they've
Well,
done
they-
the same thing. I think the difference is
I
that
I would argue
Yes.
that what they did with Merrick Garland represents a significant escalation of the
Yeah.
of the partisan gridlock.
They just didn't- they weren't-
We
they
had
wouldn't-
an opening. It didn't get filled.
they didn't even get a hearing.
Well,
They
but
didn't
if
even
it-
get to
for a
that
whole year.
process. for a
But
whole
you know,
year.
if you turn around and say, if they gave him a hearing, to me, it's intellectually dishonest if you say, ain't a prayer, I'm going
They
to go
didn't even
through the
let the
facade of giving you a hearing, but I'm going to vote against you.
They didn't even let
No.
the process get to that point, though.
And if they had done that, then of course they would have had to say something about
As to why he's not qualified?
and we would have been able to hold them accountable
Could we-
for what they were saying about that. And
Right.
you know, and
This was a breakdown of the democratic process.
But how was that different before when the Democrats held up filling a Supreme Court
They
position?
didn't. They've never really held anything.
No, they had
up
the
like
hearings,
this.
but it didn't get filled.
I
think
mean, we
that's a-
didn't. We didn't want Bork, but we didn't. But we wound up getting somebody else. So
They allowed the process to play out. And the whole point of a hearing is to weigh out the pros and cons. Doesn't guarantee the person who has, before the Congress is going to get in, but it allows the process
See,
to
I
play
think
out.
a lot of it is the Democrats got hit with this whole logjam. Since they were the head of the ticket, they were the president.
Yep.
At the end of the day, you say, okay, the CEO, it happened on your watch. I'm going to vote against you. And I
was
have this
personal.
feeling that people just wanted to change.
well,
They wanted to change, but they also need to understand how the change happened. How not everybody is equally accountable in obstructing the
But at the end of
process.
the day, well, you can argue it both ways. You can say that Trump won, or you can say that the popular vote went to Hillary.
So why have we, as the biggest democracy on earth, abdicated our votes? And why do we continue to allow it to happen? That we have this electoral college that has never made any sense to me. Continue on.
I read a really interesting article about
one
that.
vote, one person, one vote means that Hillary Clinton won the election. But nope, stop the presses. We have to go back to this whole idea that each party, who elects the electors?
The parties.
Exactly. The parties elect the electors, not the people. And then the electors elect a
Lisa,
president.
is there merit in saying if we didn't have an electoral college, small states would get ignored?
How so?
Spend all your time in California.
Maybe
Well,
so.
You know, you
But
get a lot
they-
more votes,
the
spend all your time in New York,
The small
Pennsylvania.
states
Same kind
still
of thing
get
happens with
ignored.
the electoral college, though, but in different states.
Who went
You know,
to
there
Rhode
are
Island?
battleground states.
I know.
Well, I mean, let's face it, no Republican's going to bother with Massachusetts. You know, to get the 12 Republicans that are voters here, that's not going to happen.
No, but we've seen the population move, you
And
know,
shift.
shifted to the southwest, and then there are other population move. We lost a congressperson a couple years ago because our population
Because our census numbers went down.
it went down, exactly. But our democracy is based on one person, one vote. So again,
Well,
why
so-
do we
so-
continue to forget
So
about
there was
it?
a really interesting article about this that was published in The Atlantic recently, which talks about the history of the Electoral College and how it came to be, and you know, takes you back through some of the writings in the Federalist Papers and so forth by Madison and Hamilton and people like that. And they really did envision one of the things they were concerned about was having democracy, but not too much democracy, because they were afraid of the tyranny of the majority. They were afraid that liberty would be overrun by
Like a mob
the mob.
mentality.
Right.
Okay.
And so so the Electoral College is actually a number of things. It plays a number of roles. For one thing, it is this balance to try to prevent small states from getting overruled by big states. It also played a role in the compromises that were meant to paper over the issue of slavery and sort of kick the can down the road.
Three-fifths
because
person type
three-fifths
of-
a person, it became really difficult to become president without having support in both northern and southern states.
Okay.
And but another role of it was they actually envisioned the Electoral College as being a kind of a deliberative body that would exercise mature judgment about the presidential candidates and would it be in a position to
Almost
to
overrule
stop a popular demagogue from
demagogue.
taking over a figure like Trump.
They envisioned
And
that.
so they actually, so now here we are, but the Electoral College never became that. It became a dead letter almost immediately, became a formality.
Yeah, I
And,
guess Lisa's got a point,
you
because
know-
if you think about it,
But who gave the power to the parties to elect the
Well,
electors?
and the parties have no constitutional roles. There's
Right.
nothing in the Constitution that says we're going to have political parties. And so, you have this, and the Constitution leaves it up to the states to decide how they're going to choose the electors. The states could choose the electors any way they want.
and they can burden them with obligation.
With obligation, or
Because
they
we could
can
just say, look, we're picking our X number of,
Right.
electoral college votes, and hey, guys, you vote the way you feel like it.
or
Right.
thou shalt vote according to the outcome of the state election
If
by law.
if popular vote goes to blue, all of you go blue. If it's 49-50, I mean, you got
49-50.
all the pieces.
Yeah.
But I don't understand the piece that says, I read that the Electoral College is supposed to keep the Rhode Islands from getting run over. But I sit there and say, okay, compared to the Pennsylvanias and Ohios, how much time did either candidate spend, even
So-
in Massachusetts?
I think
So you
they
have to
flew
ask
over
whether
the
it
state
works.
ones.
That's right.
And also, do we want to have an electoral college that exercises this kind of role that the framers envisioned, or because now, of course, it would be difficult to introduce that now, because now, if the electoral college were to say, nope, we're going to do Hillary, if they did that, everyone would say the election has been rigged. See, Trump told us. And so everybody thinks that we elect a president by a popular vote because we do go out and all vote. But the Electoral College represents a kind of a sleight of hand that the way it functions now that prevents all votes from counting the same.
But now, would a Trump spend more time in Massachusetts? I joked that there's 12 Republicans. I mean, our little banana area here in the Blackstone Valley's got a lot of Republicans and a lot of unenrolleds who can vote Republican.
I would say if you're a candidate, you would spend your resources and your time where you feel that it would yield the most votes under a
But
completely.
no, what I'm thinking of, Rand, is,
it's
okay,
like, how expensive are these
if I
votes?
believe that no matter what, Massachusetts will always go blue, then why, if I'm a red candidate, would I spend any time here at all?
Well, and they don't.
And they don't. But now, if it was popular vote, where somebody from Milford's vote is exactly the same as somebody from San Francisco, well, maybe I would spend more time here because it's 1 and 1.
If voters in Massachusetts are less expensive to reach than voters in California, you might want to invest in that.
But see, Trump just ran a campaign that basically took it to the national media, which never questioned his ability to be president or his policies or what he stood for all through the primary process and beyond. He was playing at a level up here that reached people constantly and all the time. Because up until the day of the election, I was saying to myself, don't worry, we've got the ground game, which meant the Democrats are out there knocking on doors, talking
lining
to
them up.
people, lining up the votes. He was up here saying, speaking to people through the television, through the social media, through, over and over, tweeting constantly, and reaching people that way. So the ground game became less important because he had the message that people wanted to hear.
But Lisa, nobody could argue against Trump's policies during the election.
Nobody did.
Couldn't.
Why?
Because he didn't provide any.
Right.
There was nothing to argue against. Did
But
you
then-
see him come out and...
Except for just sort of iconic statements like we're going to build a wall and Mexicans are rapists and murderers.
No
and all this
Muslims.
stuff. No Muslims.
But nobody
and-
pushed back on it. I shouldn't say nobody. Oftentimes, the media and other interviews, there was no pushback. There was no coming back at him. And
Well, he got it all established during the Republican primary process, and the problem is, so many of the Republicans, basically kind of go along with a lot of that stuff anyway, and
But those Republicans, I mean, I was explained years ago by John Fernandez that you got 40% will always go blue at the end of the day, 40% will always go red. You're fighting for the 20% in the middle.
which may now be 10%
Would-
instead of 20.
But you're fighting for a really little sliver.
Yep.
So when you win by 8%, you're really getting 2/3, or and you sit there and say, okay, what did Hillary miss? I mean, you read about Bill Clinton screaming she's not paying attention to Bubba. The white Goomba vote in the middle. And yet, it seems like she wasn't, that he may have been right.
Well, he may have been.
Now, personally,
no.
I don't like the fact that somebody says you're a white, uneducated male, so you don't
Yeah.
know enough to vote.
Well,
Okay, yeah, I do.
No, but those were the folks who
I know
did
how to
turn
get
out
to
to
the polling
vote.
place.
Yeah, those were the folks who did turn out to vote, and they voted against her.
But then why? That was, in my mind, the traditional, the worker, in
traditionally,
Flint,
that was
Michigan.
the Democratic votes.
But I
Right.
think the Democratic Party has kind of lost touch with all of those folks.
Yep.
And it's pretty clear to me that, and it didn't help that Hillary had all this history of being, part of the previous, I guess you could call it triangulation, or the era of the 90s when the Democrats made their peace with Reaganism.
Well,
And-
your darling bride cringed when I said Hillary, Milhouse, Clinton. Right? Because to me, her approach was Nixonian. Richard Nixon thought he was above the rest of us. He thought he was above the law. And I'm sorry, the impression I got, so did Hillary.
Well, I think the impression I read was more about she was entitled. This was going to be a cakewalk
Right.
for her.
It was an inauguration, not an election.
Yeah.
And maybe that's where she failed. But there were a lot of, they say a huge percentage of the black vote didn't come out and vote at all. a significant lower percentage than when Obama ran. And now that's disappointing.
And think about Trump goes to the inner city.
He didn't go
Where,
to the
and
inner
he
city,
said,
actually.
huh?
He did not
He
go
didn't.
to the inner
Well,
city.
no, but he called out to the people of Detroit and said, "You're worse off. How much worse can you be?"
He said that
me?"
in front of a bunch of white
White
folks.
people.
Yeah, but the message was sent out. His message to the inner city, and I don't buy it's just black, it was the poor people of the inner city, is, you got a bad life. It can't be any worse with me. It's like saying, oh my God, Lisa sucks, but I suck less. So vote for me. I mean, that was my problem with this whole election.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, I want a CEO that I can look up to, that I, really admire.
I guess it
Neither
comes
one
down-
did that for me.
I guess it comes down to is what do we want from our government? What is the purpose of government? And maybe we've lost touch with what that role is. If they're looking for a CEO to run the company, we're supposed to be protected from CEOs that have more power than the everyday person. I thought that was the purpose of government. Level the playing field, to keep things fair and balanced for people, to protect the masses from.
But Christine, look at a company. You have a CEO and an executive team. Everybody reports to the CEO, but the CEO reports to the board. The board's role is supposed to be to guard the value of the shareholders. I guess in my simplistic mind, I look at Congress as having that role, that they're supposed to be the ultimate. There's enough of them, so that even a president can't do silly things.
Well, yeah, it's the checks and balances. And theoretically, with that acronym, you're trying to talk about or that analogy, you're trying to talk about us being the shareholders then.
It's my country, yes.
Yeah, it's a nice analogy, but it doesn't make too much sense when I see more the shareholders being big business in the government, and we are the worker bees that are holding the company up. And our needs are not as important as the shareholders, which are the people that have the deep pockets. So
Right, and then when nothing happens, and then when you have banks that aren't punished, CEOs of banks who don't go to jail, everybody gets away with everything except that if your house was foreclosed on, you have no place to live, and you're still struggling with all this. So the poorer voter has got nothing no matter which party's in.
Right.
And I have no problem, and Christine, I know you'll shudder, with a CEO making a ton of money if it's all based on stock. Because for the CEO to make a lot of money on stock, it means the stockholders did really well. Problem I have is when I see these payouts to executives, that the value for the stockholders going down, the price of the stock is going down,
the
so my
company's
value.
not doing well. But they're
Company's
still
not
getting
doing well, and you're still getting paid.
And plus all of the different ways that there are that a management team has for goosing the stock price on a short-term basis.
But again, to me, do it in options over 5 years.
That would be a
So
lot
if you
better.
make a ton of money, that means me as a stockholder made a heck of a lot more, and I'm okay with that.
Right, but this doesn't translate to our government. Our form of government doesn't work that way. We elect people to represent us, and
They're supposed to be our voice,
Yeah.
and they're
But-
supposed to
but
represent
they're
our needs
not.
and
I
interests.
mean,
Right.
They are not functioning
Who's
that
our
way.
advocate?
Exactly.
They mostly work for,
We're at day 14 or some silliness of the almost Trump regime, administration, whatever you want to call it.
regime.
I know you would call that something nice. The almost Trump administration, initial reaction to what's coming from Trump.
I'm terrified.
Why?
Absolutely terrible.
I'm the other
Because
way.
I've never heard talk from any candidate and president-elect in the way he's talking. He doesn't care about the rule of law. He doesn't care about the freedom of press. He doesn't care about, it does. We can excuse him for the fact that he's a businessman and he's not knowledgeable about a lot of these things, but it doesn't really matter. If he doesn't care about the rule of law, none of this matters.
But Carol, I'm going the other way because I was scared to death the day after the election that he's going to come guns a-blazing, saying, I won. Well, again, but I'm saying at least what I saw initially, we're going to repeal Obamacare and leave everybody without insurance. And then what I heard him say was, well, no, you know, there's parts of Obamacare that we really want to keep. That made me feel better.
Well, take a look. But take a look. You know, I think Elizabeth Warren is credited with saying that personnel is policy. You take a look at who he's putting in the administration. Take a look at Steve Bannon, this foaming at the mouth white supremacist. Take a look at Jeff Sessions, who is the most racist member of the Senate.
That he was rejected
The
as a Supreme
NAACP
Court
is
justice.
un-American.
If we look at what that will mean when these people start governing, we're going to have an uptick in authoritarianism. We're going to have, it will be open season on more voter suppression laws because the Justice Department will look the other way.
Do you really believe that, Rand?
I do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look what he
I
did
do.
already with the person at the Hamilton concert, and they kind of spoke their mind afterward. And Trump was tweeting that they owe Pence an apology. Well, it's a freedom of speech. You may not agree with what they said,
Oh, Chris.
but that's a piece of it. That's the attitude, and that's the chipping away. It doesn't have to be guns a-blazing. It could be death by 1,000 cuts. And this
it's
is
more
what's going
likely
to
to be
happen.
that way.
And it'll be
But, you know,
insidious.
when I saw the head of justice meet with somebody who she could be investigating and who she was investigating his wife, I sat there and said, that's not right. You know, I mean, meeting with Bill Clinton to talk about the grand, I mean, first of all,
You're right.
this
That
woman
was
is,
poor decision
or this
completely.
person is way too intelligent to not know
How things
that
work.
nobody's
Yes.
going to believe that Bill Clinton came out to talk about his
So,
grandkid.
but that's all. That's all in the past now. Now
yeah.
we are dealing with Herr Trump, and you know, and the kind of
But will
person
it
he is.
really,
Yes.
will he be able to change that much?
Well, I think that our institutions and our constitutional traditions are going to be tested by this guy. I don't think this is a guy who has never known limits in his entire life. He has been an autocrat in his own
Yeah, but
bubble
welcome
of a
to the big
world.
table.
But look, you know, but the point is, he's been surrounded by yes men all of his life.
Yes.
And so, and we've seen, I think, a lot of indications that he really just is not able to stand the idea of criticism or opposition. And then there are all those statements he's made in the past approving of things like the Chinese Tiananmen Square crackdown and the way Kim Jong-un took over North Korea by murdering all of his family. And you know, this is a guy who basically believes in one thing, power for himself. And the world is divided into two kinds of people who have power and people who do not have power. And people who have power are entitled, in his view, to treat people who do not have power like roadkill. And that's the way, and that's the
Rand,
attitude he has
on a
towards
very
women as
local
well.
level, you can believe that in some of the committees in town, you have power. I always laugh, because when somebody says, well, what's the FinCom like? I said, well, to me, it's the most influential, powerless people in town.
Well,
they don't even get the
Well,
vote.
we're talking about the federal government. We're talking about the biggest army
but
and
what I'm
navy in the
saying
world.
is
We're talking about the
We've
the
seen people who are
FBI and the
selectmen,
CIA and the
who are
works.
FinCom,
The nuclear
who think
button.
they have power, and then they realize town meeting are
Yeah.
the ones that are going to vote yay or nay. Don't you think Trump is starting to figure out that
No.
he can't bully the
I don't
Senate?
think you'll see the true Trump until after the inauguration. And he's putting a lot of people in power that are going to really influence and impact our lives every day. And the ultimate is the Supreme Court appointment he's going to make. And
But we know what his list is, unless he's lying.
Well, look at what Pence even believes
And that
in.
is another source.
Well,
of
but he
concern.
has said, here's my list that I'm going to draw from. And I do believe him that once he makes up his mind, he has said, here's my list of possible Supreme Court appointees. Okay, I'm not appointees, but I'm going to suggest one of these people.
Nominees, yeah.
Nominees, yeah.
Okay. Do you see anybody on that list that is absolutely terrible?
I haven't seen the list.
Yeah.
I haven't
I haven't seen the list, but
But the thing with him is, so I don't think I ever saw it, but He's going to be able to nominate people. He's going to be able to put people out there. When they don't do what he thinks they should, or when the outcry jeopardizes his popularity, is he going to be able to sit there and go, "You're fired"? Is he going to be able to pivot enough? Because this is what he brings to the table, that he's this great businessman. But that's not the way government works. So is he going to be able to keep changing people until the right person, the right fit is there?
I don't know, but I remember when we were studying the difference between industry and government. In industry, you have 5 plants, and you can make an economic decision that better to consolidate these 2, shut these 2 down, put everything in these 3. Okay, it's very, I mean, the metrics are there.
Goes on all the time.
Then when you say, I'm going to do that on a congressional level, and the representative from Springfield, Mass. says, wait a minute, one of the 2 plants you want to close is mine. And 3,000 of my people are going to be thrown out in the street, which affects 12,000 of my residents. Not so easy for you to get me, but it'd be better if we put everybody in St. Louis from an economic point of view, not for Western Mass.
Right.
So
because-
there's the reality that he can't just come in and say, you're fired, I'm doing this.
There are some things admittedly there are things that that are functions of the permanent government apparatus and the political system that he would have difficulty changing, especially since he is starting from an extremely limited fund of knowledge about how all this stuff works.
And someone who doesn't want to be
But wait a minute,
educated
Ronald
either.
Reagan, I mean, Einsteinian? Not.
No.
He admitted, his value is that he surrounded himself with people.
But give him credit for that, though.
Yeah.
As much as I didn't care for Reagan,
Right.
the fact that he was able to listen to other people and realize what his limitations were.
He
I
was
don't know
a
if Trump
good
is a-
manager.
Well,
He
Trump-
wasn't a
He was
good expert.
governor of California for a while, too, before he became president,
Right.
even. He had more experience. He was president of the Actors Guild, too. I
He
mean,
was a union guy. You should like him for that.
well, he left that seat a long time before presidency.
But I guess I'm still of the when I think about it, I still believe in the American system, that somehow we're going to be able to control any silliness.
I don't know. I just
That's our
don't know.
hope.
I don't have the
He's
same
already,
confidence you do.
He doesn't want the press corps around him. He doesn't. Today he chewed out the whole press corps yesterday.
Again.
And then
Okay.
today. wait a
You
minute.
wee-wee on my leg enough times, I'm going to get annoyed.
Well, they wee
You know.
on his leg because they were calling him out on ridiculous things he said and how insulting he was. And they call him out or point out or question something. In his mind, that's wee-weeing on his leg. I mean, if they look at him cross-eyed, you're wee-weeing on my leg.
But I laugh because I listen to Fox News.
I'm
And
sorry.
I listen to CNN. And I really believe somewhere in the middle is probably reality. I would
think
never.
CNN is a little bit moderate, too. I don't see
Of
them
course
as
you
too-
would. Yet an hour ago I had the conservatives in who think CNN is so far to the left.
All conservatives think every media is liberal anyway, so.
I mean, I'm worried about. I'm worried about the press.
Their ability to
Their ability to
communicate
be
what's
able to
going
tell
on.
the truth.
Yeah.
But they
They're-
haven't
they're-
told the truth in ages, Carolyn. I mean, to seek investigative reporting is
Yes, I agree.
minuscule.
Yes, it is. It is
There's
gone
stuff
down
going
the
on
tubes.
in our backyards that is abysmal, that gets
No
almost
coverage.
no coverage. And so I guess I can't, I'm saying I can't hang that on Trump at this point because it doesn't sell. Investigative reporting doesn't
No,
sell.
sensationalism
And
sells.
That's what Trump has just proven. Sensationalism sells.
You got to admit one thing. The guy is brilliant at running a presidential campaign because you can argue all the things he said was crazy but on almost no money.
So
He
what does that
became
say
president.
about us? As a
Right?
But
country?
it's the next couple of years. Yes, a lot is going to be about Trump, but it's also going to be what does the American voter stand for? How invested are they in democracy, or are they willing to walk
or do
away
they
from
want to
it?
buy into this
Right, and walk away.
racist tribalism that these people are bringing in?
there were 30. There was only 32 minutes of between all three networks, among all three networks that actually talk substantively about policy without any initiation from any candidate.
Yeah.
32 minutes in the whole campaign. It was the least that they've ever had. I looked at this chart. They were like 200 minutes.
Again, what are you going to debate when there's no policy to debate?
There
Well,
was
then you
there
have
was
to-
policy, but they didn't ask the right questions. They didn't press
The
for the
American
answers.
voter didn't demand policy debates. Because
Well, and-
when I read it, when I look at it, I didn't see it.
Well, and the press certainly didn't really help the American voter to imagine that
No,
maybe
Trump-
that would be a good idea
Well,
either.
Trump was their dream. Every day, people were dialing in to say, what did he say now?
What did he say now?
Look at the debates that weren't, okay?
Yeah.
Those, maybe the last one was closer to a debate, but millions of people tuned in. The ratings were out of sight. That's all the networks wanted to know
Sure.
about. They didn't care what was said. He bombed in the debates. Everybody gave him to Hillary. What did that get her?
Yeah.
So
What does that say about the
Well,
the
it's
need for
But you know,
debates?
you
too?
say he bombed, but yet the biggest issue was she didn't get people to like her.
right.
You can say, well, she
No,
had
I'm saying,
better-
you know,
No, I agree. Technically,
Yeah.
she had more points.
Right.
You know, the
She was
East
more
German
knowledgeable.
judge held up the sign, you know, on technical merit, much better points.
Right.
On show, sorry, you still don't, I still don't like you, so I'm not going to vote for you. So, yeah, technically, she was the most qualified. She was, but you didn't, strategically, you didn't get the goal accomplished of getting people to like you. And that may be sad.
Well, I think that's a part of
It's
it. I don't
just-
think it's all of it.
No,
And
I don't think so either.
The whole email thing with Comey, you know, launching
Oh.
into this again in less than 2 weeks, when usually there's a, which I didn't know before, but usually there's a blackout on
Yes.
this kind of stuff for 2 months.
Yeah.
You know, to me that's ridiculous because
and what was
if
doubly
there's
rid-
something awful though? What if something is, the candidates are doing something awful? Then we should know about it. But there was nothing there.
Well, the funniest
was
part
all-
was one of the things that was brought up is you can't have Hillary, a candidate, going in to manage the country if she's going to have all these lawsuits. Yet Trump
is now having to settle all of his lawsuits,
Right.
one after another.
you know, so you sit there and say, okay, let's get through it. The facts really don't line up. They just don't.
People don't care about facts.
We,
Fa-
They
facts
have their
are
beliefs, and that's more important
But
than
now
facts.
you run into, you got the House, you got the Senate, you got the presidency. Do something.
Well,
You know, and let's hope, Rand, this time I hope I'm right and you're wrong, that my faith in the American political system is stronger.
it's only as good as the people that are going to defend it, though. And I
Well-
just
That's right.
wonder about.
I want to encourage people, if they who are unhappy about this election, get involved.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Get involved in your local, whatever
really
your
does matter.
community organizations are. We have to become aware of how they work, and we need to make them work, and we need to be able to be clear about what makes them effective.
And there I'll agree 100%. I mean, you heard me during the election. To our 6 loyal viewers, I always said, I'll never ask you to vote for a candidate, but I'll beg you to become informed and vote.
But then after the vote, you should know who your state reps are, your senators. You should know what issues are on the table that they're voting on, and how that's
Absolutely.
going
You
to
should
impact
know what they're
you.
doing in your
That's
name.
right. That's right. And so, you know, that's the participation
And we
that we
had,
need.
we'll get back on our next show to see, you know, by then it'll be President Trump or close to President. I know, yeah, you're dying even hearing the words. The look on her face, it's like a sad puppy. You know, the kid who had the ice cream cone and somebody took it. But we'll be able to look and say, okay, now he really does have the gun and the bullets. Let's see.
And the nuclear button.
Yeah,
See if
let's
he's
see if
going
he
to shoot
keeps it
himself in
holstered.
the foot.
But locally, I mean, one of the most popular governors in the country, and I think the hardest one, because being a popular governor in a red state has got to be a heck of a lot easier than being a popular governor in a blue state. He had 2 issues that he put his name on. Both went down. Did he get a black eye?
Well, he also punted and said who did he vote for president? He wouldn't.
He's beige.
Yeah.
He's very non-committal.
He's almost purple like me.
Yeah, I would say not even. I think he's colorless, because if you're going to really be someone who's going to lead, he's playing it too safe and not taking a stand on a number
But he
of
came out
things.
for charter schools.
Well,
Yeah.
that's big business speaking. That's the Koch brothers and I think even Bloomberg putting a lot of money into that, which is the union
And the
busting
Waltons.
thing. And the Waltons, yeah.
Yeah, Wall Street and union busting.
And that's who he's aligned himself with at the end of the day, if you look at where the money's coming from.
Union busting?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You don't
Teachers'
see
unions.
that?
Teachers' unions are one of the major supports for the Democratic
Democratic Party.
And so, right-wing elements like the Koch brothers have long wanted to crush teachers' unions.
And you do that through charter schools?
Sure.
Yeah.
You're not union. You don't have to. You take a lot of.
But you represent that much.
Now-
Well, and it's
Now.
also
It's growing, and that's the push to grow it. And it takes away money from the school systems. So you have a school that's failing. Oh, don't fix it. Let's start another school right here, parallel system. How much sense does that make, really? And the people and the students that go to the charter schools, if they're not working out, if they don't meet a certain criteria, they feel like, well, we can't educate them. They don't have to keep them. So they send them back to the public school they came from. If they do that after the 1st of October, the money that goes to the stays at the charter school, doesn't go back to the school system for the rest of that year. So now that school system has to educate this kid by law with the less funds. So it's a shell game with the money.
Yeah, but that'll balance. I mean, at
How?
The end of the day, when you say school choice,
Choice and charter are 2 different things.
Those are
It's
two
different.
different
but the money
elements.
goes with the kid. If you school choice to Holliston, and then you decide you don't want to be there and you come back.
That's your choice,
That's-
not the school's choice. The charter school makes that decision. And they don't have they have a least percentage of special ed kids. That's a big chunk of money that the public schools have to pick up. They can hand pick and cherry pick who they want to keep in their system. And not all charter schools are horrific. I'll own that, and I agree. There are some charter schools that are run by CEOs. They contract out.
They use a business model
So
to run a school.
And there are some that have really
don't get it.
performed very poorly. But the point is that why are we spreading ourselves thin financially? You should know it, fine, calm person. There's only so much money, so much of the pie that can go around. If a school is not performing well, what's wrong? Why are we not fixing
But I
it?
thought that was the whole reason for school choice. It forced towns to deal with underperforming schools, or you lose your kids and you lose the money that goes with them. A high school kid at Milford High brings us in, 47% of the $9,800. If a kid's school choice is out, okay, the overhead that stayed, we're paying for. The money went with the kid. So it's forcing us to deal with it.
I think there's a higher percentage of kids that do school choice that stay in the school they choose versus the charter school, because the charter school sets the limits and will say, we can't keep this kid, and sends him back.
That I want to learn about, because I didn't know that. Part of me feels like, okay, if a charter school is working, then it should work for the kids.
Who does it work for, though?
But that's what I want to learn.
But that
'Cause-
was interesting during the whole debate for me, is that if the parent is not happy with the school, the public school, why aren't they working to change it? Why aren't they working with other parents? Instead, there's this, let's break away and do our own thing.
Bailout.
Yeah, it's a bailout, exactly.
We've got these buildings, we've got the potential to make the change. It's kind of like the MCAS, which I find is ridiculous. Supposedly, theoretically, it's supposed to measure the performance of the school. So you have a school that does poorly, and instead of trying to say, okay, let's fix the problem, they give them less money. I mean, how much sense does that make?
That's
If the whole point is to say, okay, you're not performing well, and
It ghettoizes that public school.
right,
But on the other hand, you can turn around. Years ago, we were told, if we had an extra $1 million, we'll improve the MCAS scores in Milford. That year, we voted an extra $1 million into the school system.
did it make a difference?
No.
Okay, so is it the testing or is it the school?
Don't know.
And
But I
again,
know the $1 million went in and never coming back out.
you're
Right, but
throwing it
sometimes
into
you can't-
testing.
Right, and sometimes you can't say that in that, what is it, 9 months that a kid's in school, that's enough to change it.
And see, a lot of times, and I brought it up before, when my daughter was in 8th grade, Tommy Davern, who I admired as a school principal, because he really, that was his school and his kids.
And eventually a
And I went to him,
superintendent.
because I was on the parent, not the PTA, but the school advisory committee. And I remember looking at Tommy, and you could talk straight, and I said, Tommy, why do your scores suck? And he looked at me and says, because you're ignorant. I said, good, enlighten me. And he showed me how Milford has a very bimodal distribution. Our top kids, if you looked at
Doing
just the
great.
Gaussian curve, they're as good as any school around. But we have a lot of kids in the ELL program that are learning the language, they're new to the United States. When you average them,
Right.
Milford looks a lot worse.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
yes.
And that average isn't actually representative at all
No,
for planning
no.
purposes, for figuring out what
And
to do with Milford.
From a union point of view, I'm one of those people when it comes to teachers, I'd like to pay every teacher $100,000 plus a year. If the unions would back off and let me use 2 words, at will. Like in industry, you bought them 5%, I want them gone every year.
Well, I'll agree with a certain accountability. And as a union person, however, I do sometimes see mediocrity that can creep in, and I get that. There is ways, and there are accountabilities that management or administration has. They don't exercise it, and I see this where I used to work too. What happens is you get that passive, they're not going to do it, and they wait till the other person drops a dime
Right.
on somebody. There's progressive discipline, there's accountability. Administration has to do their job in that area also.
And I would get rid of them.
Well,
Just like if I don't do my
Or if
job,
they're not, yeah.
the board is going to say, we need a new VP of Ops, out.
so the union holds people not accountable, it holds the process accountable.
Right.
I kind of like one of the people I admire who's got an ego like Wyoming is Alan Dershowitz, though. And he was all about, you take away the individual personality and you protect the process. So the union makes sure that a person is not unfairly treated or unfairly disciplined.
And Christine, this is going to be the one. You challenged me to fact check a couple things last year.
Yes.
I'll bring to you. Let's put on the agenda for the next meeting to find out some of the facts behind charter schools.
Okay.
There you go.
Because that is a critical piece. And we'll talk about what's going on, with the pipeline, because it's been awful quiet.
It has been quiet, and that's because Spectra got socked with the pipeline
Yeah, and
tax
trying to
being
sneak
illegal.
through this tax thing that.
Right.
And right now the legislature is really essentially not in session.
So
though.
in about 90 days, we'll come back and we'll start with those two.
Right.
And then we'll look and say, okay, the Trump, not regime, administration,
Regime.
he's our president. What was it we were
Where's the
told?
pity?
Respect the office, if not the person.
That's right.
Sometimes difficult.
I hear you.
We missed a few other questions too that
And
we could talk
we'll
about.
go through. And
Fasten
as
your
always-
seatbelts, because we're in for a bumpy ride.
Well, we've been there for a year and a half now. I don't know how much bumpier it can get.
It can get bumpier.
To our 6 loyal viewers, thank you for joining us. What Carolyn said is profound. Get involved, become knowledgeable. You're not going to run for president, but become part of the school advisory committees, become part of the finance committees, become part of the town, and become part of the solution, not the problem. So as always, thanks for watching. The next show will be just as exciting, but may God bless and may tomorrow be a better day than today. Thanks,
Hear,
guys.
hear.
Not too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just